I never thought I'd make one of these videos, but here we are. I'm ranking a whole bunch of video games from 1 to 40. This is meant to be a fun, relaxed, mostly subjective list. These games were all ranked by microscopic measures because my love for all of them is more or less the same. In some cases, things made it onto my list that I'm not actually quite as fond of as some of the others. Overall, though, I tended towards games that brought me a great deal of happiness. I tried to reconcile actual quality with my own personal biases, but at the end of the day, this is definitely just a list of games that jive really well with my own personal taste. And there are also dozens of games which won't be mentioned anywhere in this video that I absolutely adore, many of which have a lot of replay value and I would definitely recommend. And I should also note that there are some genres that I just don't ever feel like playing. And there are lots of games that are, objectively speaking, as good or even better than some of the things that I put on the list, but they just don't happen to do it for me personally. So let me break it down. What makes a game good for me? Well, there are 6 things that I tend to focus on, and if you have a similar personality to me, where you really value these things, this is probably a really good list for you. Firstly, I value beauty and aesthetic. Does the style feel artistic? Does it feel meaningful, inspired, unique, self-consistent? Is it a joy to look at? Secondly, the soundtrack. Do I love the music? Would I want to hear it again after beating the game? Music is very important to me. If I'm not enjoying the soundtrack, I just don't want to play the game in a lot of cases. The third one is very subjective for me. Is it actually recreational? Is it legitimately fun to play? And the fourth one is connected to that. Is my emotional state tangibly improved after playing it? Do I feel like I've actually gained something psychologically from engaging with it in the first place? The fifth one is probably the most subjective for me, and this is just something I seek personally in games that will bias me towards a game, and that's depth. So the depth of story, does it have mystery, is it high concept, does it have a lot of depth in the gameplay, and just the overall vibe. Is there something really there, something really interesting and evocative or even philosophically interesting? And then finally, it's just the end product has to be greater than the sum of its parts. Sometimes I can play a game and all the parts are right and I just don't feel anything about it. I walk away from the game, I don't even remember that I've played it or that I've seen it. So how does it all come together? Did I get anything out of the experience? Will I actually take these memories with me? Did it have replay value? So conversely, what turns me off a game is pretty much the opposite of that. Is the art style bland or ugly? Is it depressingly generic art? Does it just look like cheap clip art? Does it have an art style that feels really uninspired and lazy? That will turn me off a game really fast. Secondly, the music. Like I said before, there are some games where I want to mute the soundtrack. That will turn me off a game really fast. Thirdly, and this is probably the biggest one for me by far, is it a chore to play? Do I feel like it's work to play the game? Does it feel like it's just an addictive reward loop? Because I'm not interested. There has to be something more of an addictive gameplay for me to actually want to play it. Next is also very subjective. Is my emotional state worse after I play it? And this one could be divisive because some people enjoy, for example, horror games, and it's debatable whether your emotional state is worse or better after a horror game. That really depends on who you are, what you're looking for, what kinds of experiences you actually enjoy. So for me, there's a lot of really dark, really gritty games that I absolutely love and I think are spectacular pieces of art, but some of them I can only handle in small doses. It depends on the game. So for me personally, it gets into this list if it's something that I actively want to return to, that replenishes me in some way. And there are a couple really dark games on my list that are in some ways very frightening or very surreal or even stressful in certain ways. But there's enough other stuff there for me to justify wanting to engage with them. And returning to the 5th and 6th things, does it feel insipid and shallow? Does it feel meaningless, gimmicky, manufactured? Even if it's high concept, does it ultimately leave me with a feeling of emptiness? If so, then it's not going to make the list, no matter how technically good or technically inspired it is. If it falls short of being memorable or feeling like it really has something to say, I'm not going to want to pay attention to it personally. Lastly, I'll note that there will be some titles on this list which I've actually grouped together under one item in cases where the quality and gameplay experience between these titles are extremely similar. So let's get to the games. Number 40, Suikoden. So, I didn't play this game until last year. I've known about this series for most of my life and I just never gave it a try. And I have to say, another disclaimer here, I haven't seen anything besides the first Suikoden, so the sequels might have made it onto this list if I had seen them in time. The gameplay was very inspired and original. The concept of gathering all your allies and all the plot lines slowly converging, I really enjoy stories like that. This game was charming, it was original, the soundtrack was beautiful, and the story was actually pretty deep. Even though it has a very large character roster, I actually did manage to care about several different players. And without giving any spoilers, I found the ending to be extremely interesting, very moving and kind of disturbing. Number 39, perhaps the most unappreciated JRPG of all time, Folklore. What's not to love about a JRPG based on Irish myth? When I first heard about it, it seemed like it would be the perfect game for me, and honestly, I wasn't disappointed. The story is so interesting. The art is exquisite. I've rarely seen a more beautiful game to look at, and it holds up even today. And it just has all these weird little characters and strange twists and turns. It had a very experimental vibe, and I think that turned some people off. And I'm not going to pretend that this game is without its flaws. The gameplay can be a little bit repetitive sometimes, and there were a few story elements that were rushed or just needed to be developed a little bit further, especially towards the end. If you want to play a game that's beautiful, philosophical, psychedelic, strange, and a little bit creepy, this is probably the right game for you. Number 38, a pair of games which I adore, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons. I put these games pretty low on the list, even though they're games that I absolutely love. I've played them multiple times and I think they're two of the most cozy games ever created. Even though they reused a lot of assets from Link's Awakening, they somehow communicate a really interesting feeling. The games have a vibe unto themselves, and there's nothing else quite like it. Number 37, Final Fantasy X. When I first played FF10, I didn't really like it that much, but I returned to it a couple years ago and I realized how incredible it was. I realized how deep the story was and the incredible creativity that went into it. The world setting is quite beautiful, the music is excellent, and even the characters which originally irritated me started to grow on me when I saw their stories unfold. This game has a lot of flaws, but it is an absolutely outstanding RPG. Number 36, Hollow Knight. This is a game that I have not played myself. I watched other people playing it, but I haven't seen the whole game. I have, however, seen enough of it to understand exactly how good it is. If you like platformers, this game is worth your time. It's extremely original, it has this enchanting, spooky atmosphere, and it manages to make me care deeply about its characters far more effectively than most AAA games do nowadays. If you like a lot of story, if you like a lot of atmosphere, this is a really good game for you. Number 35, Shadow of the Colossus. Speaking of atmosphere, this game is incredible. I've never seen a game quite like it. I've seen a lot of things copy it since, but wow. At the time when this came out, it was so unique and so breathtaking. It has this lonely, mysterious atmosphere, this haunting music, and a strange creeping dread, somehow juxtaposed with an incredible feeling of triumph and hope. Number 34, Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap. This is the perfect game if you like cute, cozy, whimsical things. Out of all the Zelda games, I think it best communicates a kind of fairy tale feeling. It really feels like you're looking at the world through the eyes of a child. I didn't appreciate this game quite as much when I was younger, but the older I got, the more I understood its value. It literally feels like returning to childhood. It's got this sense of exploration and wonder, and it instills a kind of hope, almost as though it's saying even the smallest person can make a difference. It also communicates an extremely happy and cute aesthetic, without feeling superficial or overtly saccharine. Number 33, the original Legend of Zelda. I didn't play this game until my 20s, but when I did, I immediately understood just how important it was, just what it had done for gaming and culture in general. It brought back a feeling that I hadn't felt since childhood playing Link to the Past. A sense of the world being vast and full of mystery. I got such a thrill playing this game, even as an adult. And even taken outside of its original context, this game still holds up today. It's still just a good game in of itself. Number 32, all the old school Dragon Quest games. I've played a lot of Dragon Quest games, and I'm choosing to group most of them together because they are pretty samey. And that's not a bad thing to me. There's something really cute and comforting and relaxing about an old Dragon Quest game. There's nothing else quite like it. The music is amazing, ranging from cozy to epic to cute to heart-wrenching. It doesn't always have a lot of depth in terms of story, but it really doesn't need to. The game speaks for itself, with its unique gameplay and aesthetic. Number 31, Skyrim. There's a lot to love about Skyrim. It's really beautiful. It has an extremely well-established aesthetic. I realize that Morrowind is considered the best Elder Scrolls game, and I definitely understand why. But I think that if you enjoy getting lost in a vast, beautiful wilderness, this is a really good game. There's something interesting to explore around every corner. There's a lot of depth to the gameplay, and a beautiful sense of freedom. Number 30, Banjo-Kazooie. This game was my childhood. Watching and playing Banjo-Kazooie with my brothers will always be one of my most important memories. For its time, this game was revolutionary and is still one of the best collectathons ever made. The gameplay was tight, the graphics were good at the time, the story was funny and interesting, and the characters were charming and hilarious. Not to mention the soundtrack. There's never a dull moment in the soundtrack. If you're a young person and you like platformers, and you haven't played this game, I really think you should give it a go. It still holds up today. Number 29, Golden Sun. This game has one of the most beautiful soundtracks of all time. The music alone is enough of a reason for me to put it on this list. But aside from that, the gameplay is extremely fun. You get all these different summons and they have different powers depending on how you use them and who you use them with. The environments are extremely beautiful. The characters have believable friendships and relationships with one another. The game has a really wistful, quaint, and whimsical vibe, which is something I really enjoy. Number 28, Skyward Sword. I'm going to say right out of the gate that I do not like motion controls. I've never liked them, but even in spite of that, this game is incredible. If this game had a normal controller input and just played like one of the other Zelda games, I'd probably put it really close to the top of this list. It basically has my favorite soundtrack in the whole Zelda series. The story is incredible. The colors and art style is a non-stop feast for the eyes, and it has some of the most intriguing dungeons in the franchise. There are some things about the game that I thought weren't very good. Several parts of the game are frustratingly linear, and there is way too much tutorial and hand-holding. To me, the fact that I enjoyed this game in spite of all those things speaks volumes. When it's good, it's great. Number 27, Kirby 64. This game is just pure joy and entertainment. It's got gorgeous music, it's well polished and snappy, it has incredibly good game feel. It's a very easy platformer, which for me is honestly a boon. I love this game, it's a really important part of my childhood, and it's the platformer I've spent the most time with by far. Number 26, A Link Between Worlds. When I first heard about this game, I was pretty skeptical. It's like a bizarro copy of Link to the Past. I thought that was incredibly weird and admittedly kind of dumb. But when I played this game, one thing I can say about it, it is so fun. It's one of the most fun games I've ever played. I never wanted to put it down. It's just bursting with secrets. The music is absolutely incredible. The art style is okay, it's not my favorite, but I definitely don't dislike it. The dungeons are phenomenal and the gameplay is less linear than most other Zelda games, especially in that era. I was pleasantly surprised by this game. I won't go into spoilers here, but the story is also really beautiful. It actually made me cry at the end. I've already played through this game 3 times and I'm definitely going to do it again. Number 25, Final Fantasy VII. I must confess, this is actually one of my least favorite Final Fantasy games. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but it's not because there's anything wrong with this game per se. I actually think this is one of the most meaningful games I've ever played. The story is chilling. It has a lot of social commentary that I find incredibly relevant in the modern day. The vibe is extremely dark and grungy and eerie. Maybe it's because I was somewhat young when I played this game, but I've literally had nightmares about it. The entire beginning sequence with Midgar is an amazing trip. I will say that I feel personally that the game becomes less interesting after that point, but there are definitely some incredible moments all throughout the game. Number 24, Pokemon Red and Blue. Pokemon Blue was actually the first game I ever owned. The memories of playing it with my friends in elementary school and combing through every corner of the world stand out. Every time I encountered a new Pokemon, I got such an incredible thrill, and it was just so much fun customizing my teams, nicknaming all my Pokemon, and trading with my friends. In general, I don't usually enjoy multiplayer experience, but this game was definitely an exception. It was really fun making powerful teams and then battling against my brother and my friends at school. Number 23, Dragon Quest VIII. I personally think this is the best game in the series. It's one of Koichi Sugiyama's best soundtracks. The entire game is colorful, pretty, mysterious. Every single town is unique and charming. And the overarching story is also really interesting and engaging. I cared about this story a lot more than other Dragon Quest games. The voice acting added to the English version was also pretty good, and especially for its time. Number 22, the most unappreciated Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy V. For whatever reason, this absolute masterpiece keeps getting ignored. I've played few JRPGs that are as fun and interesting as Final Fantasy V. It has one of the most in-depth class systems I've seen in anything. Its soundtrack is one of Uematsu's very best. And that's really saying something. In my opinion, the story is as good as many of the more popular games. It just needs a little bit more humanization. If the game's dialogue was a little more memorable and its characters were a little bit better established, this game would stand next to many of its more popular counterparts. Because other than that, every other aspect of it is truly excellent. If you like old school RPGs and you haven't played this game, please play it. It's just unbelievably good. The plot is incredibly interesting, and it really has a fun vibe all the way through. Number 21, another group, Ace Attorney 1, 2, and 3, which are very similar in terms of quality and content, and really, for me anyway, need to be taken together. Few games have made me laugh this much, and few games have made me cry this much. These games are spectacular. Now, they're not for everybody. Not everybody likes text adventure style games, but just about every single character is extremely interesting and memorable. And this game just has so much heart. It encourages you to care about everyone you meet, and it constantly leaves you guessing. For me, it had this incredible sense of mystery where I was always on the edge of my seat trying to figure out what happened and what's going to happen next. Number 20, Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. Few games have this much love put into them. The developers who worked on this game were doing a passion project in their spare time, and it definitely shows. This game is creative, it's an intriguing premise, the gameplay is extremely fun, the story is heartbreakingly beautiful, and the world setting is absolutely charming. This was originally a Game Boy title, and it still holds up better than a lot of modern games I've seen. Number 19, Castlevania: Symphony of the Night. I don't even know where to start with this. This game is high fantasy at its best. It's an incredible journey. It's macabre, it's mysterious, it's transformative, it's strange and psychedelic and eerie. It's incredibly dark and disturbing, but it's filled with this sense of longing and adventure all the way through. Even though the voice acting is sometimes hilariously bad, I felt really attached to Alucard and his quest. I really wanted to see the end. This game throws you into a horrifyingly beautiful underworld. It's full of secrets, surprises, and strange twists and turns. It has a beautiful soundtrack, an amazing art style, and incredibly diverse and interesting gameplay. It's definitely one of the best games I've ever seen. Number 18, Final Fantasy Tactics. This game might have the most fun gameplay out of just about everything I've ever played. It's exciting, it's addictive, the story is excellent, the music is fantastic, the job system is deep and complex and intriguing. I really don't have anything bad to say about this game whatsoever. It's one of the best RPGs ever made, and it has one of the most unique and memorable world settings. Number 17 for me is Secret of Mana. This game was such an enchanting experience. It's got this strange, ethereal landscape. The art style is incredibly unique and beautiful. The game is presented in an extremely uplifting and colorful way, but there's an underlying feeling of sadness and despair all throughout. It definitely has one of the most moving stories I've ever seen in a game. It's made me cry on more than one occasion. The magic system is extremely interesting. And of course the music is god tier. Definitely one of the best RPGs. Number 16, Metroid Prime. In my opinion, this is the second best Metroid game ever made. This is one of the occasions where outsourcing a game really paid off. The team that made this game put so much love and devotion and passion into it, and it really shows. Once more, the music is incredible. It's got all this lore that you can explore, you can scan objects and read about them, you can learn so much about the franchise. About all the creatures, all the plants, all the places you visit. Everywhere you go, the game gives you just enough information to leave you hungry for more. The creatures are incredibly interesting, and it has some of the most beautiful level designs I've seen on the GameCube. Even if you don't like the first-person gameplay, I still think it's worth a shot because I think this is the best spiritual successor to Super Metroid. Number 15, Donkey Kong Country 1, 2, and 3, which need to be grouped together because they are all excellent. What's not to love about these games? They're fun, they're amusing, the music is awesome, the gameplay is snappy, every single level looks fantastic, every single world you enter is interesting, everything you need to know is communicated through the environment and the music. As far as atmosphere is concerned, these are some of the best games ever created. They're some of the best platformers, and some of the best games in general. Place the device on the ground and then lie on your stomach with your arms at your sides. A party associate will arrive shortly to collect you for your party. Number 14 is Portal 1 and Portal 2. I cannot praise these games enough. I absolutely adored them. GLaDOS is my favorite villain of all time. The games are extremely funny, some of the best written stories of all time, some of the most interesting characters of all time, and one of the most well-realized and interesting world settings I've ever seen in anything. I don't really like stressful video games. I don't really like dark, disturbing, dingy settings very much, but these games are just so good that I'm willing to say that I like them more than some Zelda and Donkey Kong and Final Fantasy games. Number 13 may not be for everyone, but Final Fantasy XII. I'm already a fan of Ivalice, but this game really stands on its own. It's one of the most well-balanced and well-realized world settings I've ever seen. I could get lost in this world for hours just looking at all the different little vignettes, getting all the NPC dialogue. Personally, I really liked the Gambit system. I loved customizing my characters. I loved running around in these huge environments for hours, just level grinding and gathering treasure. And that's something I usually don't like very much. I'm not really one for grinding in most video games, but there are those rare exceptions, and this is definitely one of them. For a game that supposedly plays itself, it's one of the most fun adventures I've ever experienced, and definitely one of the most beautiful places I've ever entered, with one of the most gorgeous soundtracks. The story was astonishing and interesting. It made me question everything. I love video games that challenge my perspectives. If you enjoy a dense, deep dive into a lore-filled world, this game is definitely for you. Wind Waker is just one of the most cheerful, fun, interesting games I've ever played. The portrayal of Link in this game in particular is extremely wacky. He has this huge range of emotions and he really just reacts to everything. The characters are really likable, and the game also has the most humanized and interesting villain in the entire franchise. It's rare for a Zelda game to actually make me think about the villain's perspective. The art style is outstanding, the music is absolutely spectacular, it has some of the best dungeons in any game, and the story feels really tight, really polished and complete. Definitely one of the best Zelda games and one of the best games in general. Number 11, Super Metroid. This is definitely my favorite Metroid game. I love its lonely atmosphere, I love its haunting alien soundtrack, I love all the levels, all the creatures. It's one of the most objectively good, polished, high-quality games ever made. Super Metroid is a lesson in game design. The gameplay just flows. Even though the player is likely to get lost in the world, the layout of the levels is so intuitive. I really love games like this that encourage exploration and experimentation. There's not much else I can say about this game that hasn't been said 1,000 times, but I will say that I really think it deserves all of the clout that it gets. Number 10, Majora's Mask. All the games that I'm going to list from here on, I like the same amount as each other. It wouldn't be inaccurate to say that this is my favorite game. Very few games have brought me such deep satisfaction as Majora's Mask. Playing this game as a child, I was absolutely transfixed by every single moment. Every dungeon, every NPC, every little bit of dialogue. I've rarely encountered anything that's so intriguing, so evocative, so interesting, so strange. It's got this incredibly creepy atmosphere, but it's got this underlying sense of love and wholesomeness that runs through it. It's just incredible juxtaposition. The story is god tier. The gameplay is fantastic. The music is fantastic. The game looks really good, especially for its time. The game allows you to care about every single character, even the NPCs and shopkeepers. The mechanics are brilliant, the atmosphere is amazing, definitely one of the best games ever made. Number 9 might not seem to deserve the slot it gets because it's a deeply flawed game, but for me, it has to be Chrono Cross. I have a very strong bias for this game, probably because it just ticks so many of my boxes. This is one of the most philosophical games I've ever played. It takes an extremely deep dive into concepts that I care a lot about. Chrono Cross is just about the most beautiful game I've ever seen. The art style is exquisite. It's so colorful, it's so unique. All the pre-rendered backgrounds are like a feast for the soul. This game also literally has my favorite soundtrack of all time. Like I said, the game has its flaws, but for me anyway, I really enjoyed it. I loved the gameplay, I loved the battle system. I personally don't mind how many characters there are. I wish the characters were a little bit more developed, and there were certain aspects of the story that were kind of rushed. But I came away from this game feeling so nourished. If you like deeply emotional, deeply philosophical, extremely artistic games, then this is definitely the right one for you. Number 8, Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. This is probably the game that got me into gaming. When I first saw this game, I was obsessed with it. I used to watch my brother playing it constantly, and I just never wanted it to end. I was in awe of the music. The color scheme and the art style felt so cozy and homey to me. Whenever I play this game, it feels like coming home or going back to childhood. For its time, it was an incredibly unique adventure. There really hadn't been anything like it up until that point. This game also holds up extremely well even today. Number 7, Breath of the Wild. For me, it is extremely rare for a modern game to grab me to this degree. But Breath of the Wild is an undeniable masterwork. This game granted me hours and hours of sheer, unadulterated exploration, fun, and wonder. It might be the most fun game I've ever played, and I was not expecting to find that at this point in my life. I feel like this game is literally healing to my mind, body, and soul. It just makes me feel so relaxed, so comforted. I will confess that technically I like Link to the Past and Majora's Mask more than this game, but this game is such a technical achievement that I think it deserves to be higher on the list. Number 6, Chrono Trigger. Even though in some ways I actually liked Chrono Cross more, Chrono Trigger is undeniably the better game. Chrono Trigger is one of the best games ever created, period. In my opinion, Chrono Trigger is one of the best things created, period, game or not. There really has been nothing else quite like it before or since. Once again, it has a god-tier soundtrack. The art style is spectacular, especially for the time period. But this game has also aged incredibly well. It still looks amazing. I think this game might have the best story out of pretty much anything I've ever played. It has one of the most interesting villains. All of its characters are incredibly well developed. The gameplay is phenomenal. So much love and creativity went into this game, and once more, it really shows. It made me feel incredible depth of emotion. It made me think, it made me wonder, it gave me pause constantly. I enjoyed every single minute, every single second of this game. Number 5 is a game that I initially didn't like quite as much, but over the years it grew and grew on me until it became very special. I don't know how it was that this game has grown on me so much, but this game has slowly become, for lack of a better term, my happy place. I love exploring Hyrule in Twilight Princess. Especially in the remaster, everything looks so good. The levels and dungeons are really creative. All of the villages and cultures were really well established. Each place feels so unique and interesting. Some of the new power-ups you get are really fun. After Skyward Sword, I'd say this game probably has my favorite soundtrack from any Zelda game. The character of Midna, who I initially didn't like very much, really grew on me, and now I kind of feel like she's one of the best characters in the series. This game has a lot of depth, a lot of psychological depth, a lot of philosophical depth. There's so much here to unravel, and every time I play the game, I discover just a little bit more about the world and the characters. As with a lot of Zelda games, the player really needs to read between the lines to get the full effect of the story, but there is so much here. I like this game so much, but I sometimes feel like starting up a new file right after finishing the old one. Number 4. Final Fantasy IV. I've praised a lot of video games today, and it's possible that it's starting to blur together, but it's important for me to communicate that this game really stands on its own. Final Fantasy IV is part of my soul, it's part of my DNA, it's part of my existence. I know that probably sounds really weird, but this game made me a composer. This game made me want to make video games. There's something about it, some strange feeling I've yet to communicate, some incredible sense of wonder and longing. I absolutely love the protagonist. I love his transformation story. I love all the other characters. The music leaves me in a sense of awe and wonder. The entire game has this kind of beautiful yet melancholic feeling about it. And I was beyond intrigued to explore the other worlds when they revealed themselves. It's hard to explain why this game is so important to me. Something in the fiber of the game that's almost ineffable. I can only really describe it as a spiritual connection to the game. Something in the game speaks to something inside me. And nothing else has ever quite touched me in the same way. Number 3. Final Fantasy IX. In terms of art, Final Fantasy IX has rarely been surpassed. I personally think that Final Fantasy IX is overall the best Final Fantasy, surpassed by maybe only one title. It has one of the most well-realized aesthetics. There are definitely lots of other games in the series with really well-established worlds, but Final Fantasy IX feels like a very complete, very self-consistent place. I rarely see this achieved in other games, at least not to the same extent. I thought it had one of the best stories I've ever seen in anything. I loved every single character, I loved every single moment, every single story arc. The level design was incredible. Once again, the music was top-notch. And I found myself hungry to play this game repeatedly. I think I've played it between 10 and 20 times. It's so emotionally evocative. There's so much here to care about, there's so much here to wonder about. Every single bit of character dialogue is fun and interesting and intriguing. I'm one of those gamers who likes to get every single bit of dialogue and every single bit of text, and this game seems to have the perfect amount of text, not too much, not too little. It rewards you for going out of your way to explore nooks and crannies. It's packed with secrets and sequence-breaking cutscenes, and even now I kind of feel like there's more for me to discover, more for me to explore in Final Fantasy IX. Number 2 could not be anything but Final Fantasy VI. So the only thing that can really top Final Fantasy IV and IX for me is Final Fantasy VI. I actually like 4 and 9 slightly better than 6, but I think overall 6 is the better game. I think Final Fantasy VI is probably the best title in the franchise, and it definitely deserves the popularity that it gets. It has the best story that I've ever seen in almost anything. I love all the characters, I love the protagonist, the villain is really interesting. I played this game when I was 12 and nothing has impacted me quite the same as Final Fantasy VI. It is an absolute masterpiece. It still holds up today, it still looks good. The mood and the vibe and the feeling of the game is astonishing. I can't overstate that. It's so strange. It's got this sense of wistful longing. It's dark and mysterious and hopeful and beautiful. The gameplay is also just fun. You have a lot of choice with the characters and the spells, and they all have interesting classes. And the story is just good start to finish. There isn't a dull moment, there isn't a rushed moment. It feels like the most complete and well thought out and polished Final Fantasy game overall. And now I would like to do some honorable mentions. These are games that I do not appreciate any less than the games that are already on the list. A mention for a game that's extremely close to my heart, and that game is Terranigma. And I definitely think you should play it if you've liked a lot of the other games that were in this list. The second one is Dragon Quest IX. I loved this game, and I feel like it stands alone in the series. Next, and my sincerest apologies to many people watching this, the entire Mario franchise. The next one perhaps deserves an apology too, and that's Final Fantasy VIII, which I absolutely love. I just don't love any of the games in the list less. Another apology for you Undertale fans, because I really liked that game. Honorable mention for all the other Pokemon games. I really love that franchise, and I played a lot of them. It's just that none of them were quite as impactful as the original games. My favorites were actually Gold and Silver, funnily enough, but I feel that Red and Blue deserve to be on the list slightly more because they were so unique when they came out. There was nothing else quite like them. Lastly, I have left out so many incredible NES titles, and I apologize. It's just before my time. I didn't bond with those games at the right moment in my life, but I think a lot of them probably do deserve to be in that list. My number one needs no introduction, and I suspect that everyone watching this probably knows what it's going to be. I adore every single game I've mentioned today, to the point where I feel like these games are a part of me. If I had to choose only one game that defines my childhood and that I feel has most impacted my experiences with gaming, this would probably be it. Ocarina of Time impacted me like nothing else. I said Link to the Past feels like coming home. This game is home. This game is with me all the time. A lot of you watching will probably recognize that feeling, and I'm sure many weren't surprised that this was my choice for number one. It's just so well-rounded, the gameplay is so fun. I've played through this game over 20 times and I'm still not tired of it. I still keep wanting to start new files in it. I love the story, I love the characters, I love every single area in the game. The music is extraordinary. Every single dungeon is amazing. Every single dungeon is fun. I just rarely play games that are this fun, this evocative, this tight and finished, this self-consistent. If I had to choose one game to play for the rest of my life, this would be it. I hope you've enjoyed this. I just felt like doing something a little bit different. So if you like watching me talk about stuff, I'll definitely be talking about a lot of stuff in the future. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you're still watching, thank you so much.